These are the times when some of the most outrageous people were caught right in the middle of what they hoped would be the best night of their life. And this guy's arrest was the most satisfying one I've ever seen.
39-year-old John Elliot, a factory worker for a window company.
Okay, folks, meet 39-year-old John Elliot, a factory worker whose life would soon change for the worse. Yeah, it's sad to see a man who worked hard for his livelihood give it all up over some nasty obsession. I mean, that's one way to ruin your life, but John didn't really think it through. So this dude started chatting with the setup to put some of his twisted ideas into action, and believe me, he didn't give a damn about personal boundaries.
Is okay with me.
But as soon as I saw your pic, I was like, man.
At first, he spilled his whole life story to the setup in order to gain her trust, and once he'd established himself, he took things one step further. He started to share some questionable pictures that would eventually be key in landing him in some deep trouble. But at the time, the dude was so consumed in his obscenity that he didn't even realize how deep a hole he was digging for himself. By the way, did I mention his screen name earlier? Well, saying it straight up would very much land me in trouble with YouTube, so maybe just use your imagination.
He tells the decoy about his fantasy of being with a young girl.
Anyway, this dude had some crazy ideas, and I can't imagine someone talking like this to a random stranger they'd met online, let alone someone way, way younger than themselves.
You were asking me about what I was daydreaming about. Well, that's it. You and me licking you.
Anyway, to further cement his intent, John drove for over 3 hours to land at the setup's doorstep super early in the morning. And this was after Dateline started getting popular, so let that go to show just how desperate he was.
Okay, out of the vehicle.
Hey, come on in.
The setup welcomed him in and John took the bait. She made him feel comfortable once he was inside the house, and the two of them decided to strike up a conversation for a bit, just to ease the tension. And this is when John started unpacking his box of fantasies and imagination. But of course, Chris wouldn't let any of that happen, and he cut right in to put a stop to John's messed up conversation.
You seem pretty confident on the internet in terms of what you wanted to do.
What followed next was a string of lies that Chris was finding extremely hard to believe. And just when you thought John would give up, he threw a hell of a curveball.
About all this.
I could tell you're a therapist, I know. I mean, I just...
You think I'm a therapist?
Yeah, the dude was completely delusional. It's crazy how he even came to that conclusion in the first place. But anyway, Chris decided to clear the air a little bit.
I gotta tell you, I'm Chris Hansen, and I work for a show.
Yeah, Chris decided to reveal his true identity pretty quickly. And for a second, it looked like John wanted to bury himself right in front of him. But what he said next was totally unexpected.
Just see a psychiatrist because of the way everything's going with my life.
And well, this was after he confessed his undying love for his wife. I mean, talk about damage control, right? After a feeble plea to get some mental health help, John decided to make his way to the exit. And trust me, he really took his time. Meanwhile, the cops were waiting for the moment he'd show up at the door, and once he did, it was quite the sight.
Sheriff's office, hands up! Hands up!
Although John didn't resist arrest, the cops threw him to the ground and slapped the cuffs on him. Now this might look brutal, but John deserved way more than that. And if you agree, I've got a ton more content I'm sure you'll love. So make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn on my post notifications so you don't miss out. With that, let's move on to this next guy who claimed to be holy, but the thoughts that ran in his dirty little mind were anything but. Imagine being a God-fearing man by day and a totally depraved one by night. Well, that pretty much sums up the story of this church minister. No, I'm not kidding. When Marvin struck up a conversation with the PJ crew, he almost immediately jumped into inappropriate territory. Without a single filter, he shared a whole bunch of wild and creative thoughts that involved engaging in some explicit activity. And believe me guys, there was nothing godly about it.
He asks, why do you want to give me money? He says, because I want you.
Man, what a weirdo. What's more, this guy was a so-called charitable dude throwing money around like confetti. But this is where things get juicy. He was expecting something nasty in exchange. All you have to do is read his chats, and it's guaranteed trauma. Consider that your warning.
Never had.
Oh.
Despite having absolutely no idea of who was on the other side, this prick behaved like he knew the setup for years. And even before exchanging pleasantries, the dude was sinking his teeth into the messed up stuff.
Describes in detail how he claims to have taken one of the girl's virginity.
Anyway, Marvin's time on the show was cut short when he followed the setup behind the curtain, only to find the rest of the crew staring right back at him. Awkward. Well, that was the only cue he needed to make his exit, and off he went, sprinting towards the door. And just as he opened the door, he was welcomed by a delightful sight. The cops tackled him down before he could even think of his next move. But this dude had a lot at stake. He couldn't afford to lose his position in society, and so he made a hasty decision: flee by any means necessary. However, the cops weren't in the mood for playing games.
His taser knocks him to the ground.
What's more shocking here, guys? Marvin was then taken into custody, but the real fun began during the interrogation with law enforcement. Marvin came up with a solution to repent for all his sins. Yeah, the big guy couldn't stop crying. He begged the cops to let him go. But here's the thing. Cry all you want, gentlemen, but you're never gonna walk without the offender's tag following right behind you. Now, let's meet a man who decided to pursue his fantasy, but ended up in jail instead. Yeah, this jerk happened to be a teacher who was supposed to help curious minds, but as it turns out, the dude's curiosity was really pointed in the wrong direction. Clearly, this prick was into more than just math. He had the nerve to ask someone much younger if they were willing to smoke stuff with him someday. What's more, he even claimed to be a master at blazing green.
He's obsessed with pizza, and he says he smokes often.
Now, although this dude seemed to be habitually flying the high cut, he wasn't someone who let his guard down. When he reached the house, he decided to conduct his own little investigation and started searching the house. And just as he moved the curtains, he was in for a huge shock.
Please let me go home, guys.
This so-called tutor started a rant about how he was concerned about her safety. Now, let's not forget that this was the same guy who called someone who wasn't even half his age his soulmate. Anyway, after a brief confrontation, he was quickly taken into custody, and this is where the drama began.
And you understand it, you're willing to talk to me about, we can talk about what happened today?
Yeah. The tutor started to get more and more uncomfortable as he was grilled about the chat logs. In order to get away from the situation, he came up with a brilliant plan to create some commotion. But obviously, it was a failed attempt.
Please let me go home, guys. I'm gonna get arrested going that way. Please, no.
What followed next was truly satisfying to watch.
Please. Put your hand behind your back. Guys.
Well, now he can put his math skills to good use counting his days in prison. Now here comes the guy who preferred to be known as the boss. Sadly for him, he was soon about to be shown his place.
A 12-year-old.
Hi, Poppy. Come on in.
So 32-year-old Joshua Colin, yeah, that's his real name, not sort of crappy pun, had some crazy fantasies, and trust me, this dude claimed to be a passionate lover. Delightful. He was so consumed by his thoughts that he didn't think twice before proposing marriage to someone he'd met like 5 minutes ago. And of course, this is TCAP we're talking about, so there was an entire other layer to it too.
You make me more happier. It's too bad you aren't old enough to marry. I would marry you.
Oh, and did I mention that he was actually prepared to spend the night over at the Sting House? What's more, he even brought his own dinner and even some protection because, who knows, just in case you need it, right? Anyway, cut to the moment when Chris made his grand entrance and the jerk's life flashed before his eyes.
Now is the time.
At first, it looked like Colin was sorry for his actions, but out of nowhere, he confessed that this wasn't the first time he was getting his hands dirty. And for someone who was so unbothered about what he was doing, there was just one way to take him down.
Get cops, put him under arrest.
Things got really sketchy as the interrogation continued. Colin said that he had not only pursued his dark desires, but also achieved the target. Well, I'm glad that he landed on the crew's radar, just like how this next guy who got involved was someone who was pretending to be much younger. I'm talking about the 44-year-old Matt. Now, this dude was fully aware of his actions and the consequences they came with. But did that help him steer away from trouble? Absolutely not. He landed right into the middle of it.
What's what?
Once he arrived at the Sting house, the dude was spooked by a strange noise coming from within the house. Turns out, it was the setup's walkie-talkie. That was a major goof up from the crew side. But does that mean the mission failed? Oh no. The dude circled back to his car. But did he leave? Of course not. He kept circling the area to make sure the threat had left. And once he was sure he was safe, he made his way right back to the Sting house. Like, seriously. It wasn't like the team was gonna throw up their hands and retreat the second things got dicey. Well, anyway, he found himself walking up to the entrance and was met by the setup. Everything was back on track. Or well, not quite. The dude decided to search the house just to be safe. And during this little tour of his, he came across the camera crew and boom, he was back to his senses, or so I hope. Well, I'm gonna have to keep hoping, since he bolted towards the door at lightning speed, only to be swarmed by a bunch of cops. Not exactly the most thoughtful decision. When he tried to put up a fight, the cops were left with just one option. Oh man, I'm sure he felt every single ounce of pain from that encounter. Hopefully it will stick a little harder than, well, seeing evidence he was caught in a sting. And now, let me tell you about a general manager who was interested in more than just managing his business. So, Jesse Velez, who was 30 years old, was highly interested in getting together with young guys.
Nothing's nature.
And so, on a fine spring morning, Jesse decided to follow his desire to its inevitable conclusion.
But Velez has something else planned for today's menu.
It's kind of nervous.
Jesse pulled up to the Sting house wearing a pair of captivating shorts and a tee. Well, of course he wanted to present the best version of himself, but did you know this weirdo was engaged? Yeah, dude was a cheater too. Anyway, Jesse couldn't care less about cheating on his fiancée. The confidence with which he walked into the house would put anyone to shit. But that doesn't mean he wasn't cautious. The dude knew exactly what he was getting himself into, and when the setup didn't look all too convincing, he decided to put his detective hat on. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Jesse asked for the boy's ID. It was a move none of the crew members expected, and the setup was visibly taken back. The setup desperately tried to fake a story, but Jesse wasn't buying it. So, well, the crew was left with only one option. At that point, Jesse was probably questioning his life choices. When Chris held up the chat logs like a mirror to show Jesse his true self, the dude could barely manage to squeak out a couple of words.
Oh my god, I did not know I even sent that. Yeah.
He felt no remorse for having sent some really graphic pictures of himself to the setup. The pictures were so lewd that it made him feel ew. And Chris couldn't agree more. The moron then surprised everyone when he went on to justify his actions while also throwing a side of appreciation for the PJ crew for undertaking the noble feat of capturing messed up freaks like himself. Yeah, he found it interesting, but I'm more interested in how he was taken down. As he tried to escape through the garage, Jesse was swarmed by the cops, and well, that was probably the last thing he expected to happen. He was taken down by the sheriff of the town and was transported to the nearest police headquarters.
Our garage cam captures the arrest.
What really irks me is the reason he gave for justifying his actions. He stated that he never had friends when he was young, which is why he was trying to hang out with people in order to have fun. The problem here was the kind of people he wanted to get involved with, and his definition of the word fun. But here comes a military veteran who was just 28 years old, and his journey from being a proud military man to a sicko of the highest order was honestly hard to watch. So this dude decided to throw away all the name, fame, and pride associated with his service by what? Pulling something like this? When Steven arrived at the Sting house, he expected to see a young and pure soul.
Circling the house.
I understand.
You circle the house. You pulled in the driveway.
But Steven's military intuition kicked into action, and the dude started to grow suspicious. He circled around the house in order to scope out the joint, and when he was finally convinced, he took the plunge. But that doesn't mean he trusted the setup, though.
Is a weapon in the car?
Yes.
Yep, he refused to enter the house, but he had a proposal of his own to make. He invited the setup for a romantic drive in the rain. Finally, after what seemed like a lifetime of waiting for anyone to make a move, Chris had to show up, and only then did Steven enter the house. It was time for a thorough interrogation, but the only reaction the military man had was to break down. As for his excuses, don't even get me started on those.
I was a normal person. and, you know, never ever.
Well, he had the audacity to blame PTSD from his military service. Wow. I can't imagine what the world would come to if every person who suffered from any sort of trauma whatsoever ended up in a similar position. But Steven couldn't stop his rant. He claimed that he needed help with improving his mental state, and he went on for about 30 minutes or so, explaining his trauma and his disturbed mindset.
They have a lot of free time, so it's just like...
Well, eventually, it was time for Steven to accept his fate, and although he thought he was walking towards his freedom, he happened to walk right into the arms of law enforcement.
He's handcuffed and put into the back of an unmarked police car.
But guess what the cops found in his car?
They find a knife, duct tape, a camera, and a pack of condoms.
And well, it's not surprising that even the experts were glad he was caught in the sting. The dude was dangerous in far more ways than one.
I mean, obviously those things were in the car for something, and I think that that child would be at significant risk of serious bodily harm.
That was wild. So which of these arrests was the most satisfying for you to watch? Let me know in the comments section down below. Also, don't forget to check out my latest video right here. It's even crazier.